tiny on this thing. Okay, the timer is timing. Okay, well, we're kind of going old school today, but most of you know I'm having trouble with the leveler with the new one and with an older one that I found in the storage shed. None of them are working, so we're going old school. Uh, I hate the way it looks, but it is what it is. At least the sound, as far as chapter 18, verse 27, and I'm going to back us up a little bit. And my translation of the Hebrew text came out, you will guard my ordinances, this is God speaking, and my judgments, and you shall not do any of these unclean things. Now, those are all the things that led to this point. The uh, forbidden sexual things. Let's just say it that way, because that's what we're talking about in this chapter. That it says you won't do these unclean things, neither the native or the proselyte who dwells among you. So it doesn't say that we have to worry about what people in Africa or Asia or wherever, South America, we don't have to worry about them. This isn't for them. This is for people who live in covenant with God Almighty. So the natives are the people who were born into it, obviously, and live it, because if you don't live it, you're not part of it. So it's the natives who are born into it and live it, the covenant, and then the proselytes, the people who maybe weren't born into it but converted to it. Those are the proselytes. So if we're living a Torah lifestyle, then it's for us. And let's go on with 27. Now, very literally in English, it says, for all the abominations, these, made they men the land that two faces you, and shall be unclean the land. Sure seems like we did this, but with all the technical issues we've had, I'm going to go over it anyway. If I have, sorry. Anyway, it's key, which that's a Hebrew word, which we translate as for or if or because. Those are the ways it's used in English. Kol, that's all or every, anyone, sometimes, anybody. This is ha to evot. Now that they use the word abominations, it's really just means unclean, because the thing that you got to know about the Hebrew Bible is that what is clean is what God has allowed, and what is unclean is that which God has disallowed. So anything that is beyond the purview of what God has allowed, because it's based on the law. When you are, if in fact we all have to stand before God and give an account for our lives, it's going to be based on this law, no matter who you are, what you've done, where you've been, what you do and do not know. The law that God gave is the standard by which we will be judged. It is the standard by which we are daily judged. So what do they mean by the abomination? Well, this is a deep level of impurity. And the impurity, the uncleanness, is if God said, wear the tzitzit, and you don't wear the tzitzit, you are unclean. Now, is that a deep, dark level of uncleanness? Well, not in compared to incest and child rape and things of that, and adultery. Those are much weightier, much heavier sins than the ZZO. Now, there are people who would argue against that. If God said you had to do it and you're not doing it, that's as bad as any of the other ones. And to some degree, to some on some level, I agree with that, except to the degree that, well, I don't think I'm going to be punished as harshly for forgetting to wear my ZZO one afternoon or one week as I did here recently. I thought they were on my pants and they were not. I had no idea. But anyway, I had taken them off a pair of pants to wash those and put them on a fresh pair of pants. And when I got my old pair of pants back, I forgot to, anyway. So it happens, right? You sin, you fall short of the glory of God. As it's put by one of the New Testament writers. It's how he said it. Well, he was a Jewish rabbi. He was just saying something that Jews said in the time. And it could be applied to that. I fell a little short there. I committed sin. What did I have to do to make it right? Did I have to go make a sin sacrifice and get on my knees, beat my back with chains and say, please forget? No, I just had to put the CZO back on my pants and go on with life. That's how you straighten out that particular uncleanness or abomination, right? But when it comes to something like, you know, incest or child rape or the type of things that we've been talking about here, no, you don't just, well, I did it that once and I'll never do it again, no, that's that one's going to require some serious getting right with God there, and that's going to require some serious punishment. So that's where I draw the line. Yes, I think that not wearing your ZZO is every bit as much a sin as these bad sins, but the punishment is different. So let's say it that way. So the word really is what they're saying here is this is uncleanness. And the uncleanness is based on if God said to do it and you don't, that's a sin. If God said don't do it and you do it, that's a sin. Anything that's not within this law, if you step outside of that, and one that's definite that comes to mind, smoking. I grew up, started off life Jewish, but went directly into Christianity, or fairly early into Christianity, and was taught by those people, by the Christians, that smoking was an evil sin and you'd go to hell and fry for doing that. And you had to stop doing it was one thing. And then the next thing was you had to ask God to forgive you in the name of Jesus. And I don't know, maybe say it 100 times and God will forgive you or something. I don't remember. I know that's one thing I was told when I was really young. But no, it's not a sin. Is it good for you? Heck no. Is it bad for you? Absolutely. It can kill you. It can do all kinds of damage to you. But is it a sin? No, absolutely not. Because it's not in the law. It has to be in the law for it to either be a sin or not be a sin. That's the point. Okay, and so since everything is based on the law, purity is based on the law. So if you step outside of purity, let's say you track mud in on the floor in your house, is that a sin? No. If you track blood in on your floor, is that a sin? Yeah, but it's not what we really think of as sin. You haven't committed some crime, but the blood makes things unclean, right? It makes it, because if you tracked it in, it's on you, so you're unclean, and then your house is unclean. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to clean it up. You have to wash yourself and your clothes, and you're unclean. If you recall, sometimes you're only unclean until night, even with blood, and this would be one of those times, unless it was from a dead animal. Because if what happened was you cut your finger on a piece of paper, got paper cut, yeah, that's what that's called. then that no, that's not the thing that you have to wait a whole week. We just went through that recently. You should know that. So if you touch the dead body, that's different. Then it's the whole week that you have to be separated from the people. And, a week from the time that you washed yourself and your clothes, then a week later, you are then clean again. So that kind of helps us to understand that there are differing levels of that is a punishment. Not being able to be among your people for a whole week, that can be pretty tough. I mean, it's not the end of the world, of course, but for some people who really need that interaction, it's going to feel like the end of the world at times. But anyway, so hopefully we understand what they're saying here. This is a deep level of uncleanness here because these are these sexual crimes. Then it says ha'el, which is these. Then asu, they did these things. Just say it that way. What do you have? This is anshe, which that's the word for men. It's sometimes used to mean husband, not exactly because it's just talking about the guy, the man, but the wife has been spoken of in this passage, so sometimes they'll translate it to husband. So that's okay, but it's of a male, of a man. Then it says haaretz, that's the land, that sometimes is translated as dirt, land. Uh, I think they've even used that word for field, although we have a word for field. I think it has been used that way, and it is for the whole earth, the whole ball floating around the sky here. Asher, which means that, T-H-A-T. Leaf nechem, that's from pane. So the lamed, the l sound in the front of it means two faces you, which is how they say before, because if you're standing face to face, you're standing before somebody. So we usually use the word before. Va ti tema, you'll be unclean. If you do the unclean thing, the abomination, guess what? You're unclean. Hello. Like, durr. Haaretz. Oh, that's interesting. The land is unclean. All right, so all these unclean things men did in the land before you. So where you're going, all of this nasty stuff that we've talked about these last few weeks, these people did this. It says the men did it, but everything's written in the masculine in Hebrew, so that doesn't mean that the women didn't participate. All the things that we could say the people did, that we don't say that because they didn't use the word am, which is the Hebrew word for people. Instead, they use the word for men, but it's just because it's a masculine. How do you say that about a language when it's written in the masculine? Gender. It's a gender specific language. That's why they use men. Could have used people, but they used men in this case. So that if someone had translated it, all of the unclean things that the people did, it's accurate, but translators don't tend to do that because we want it to be closer to the word that was used, which is why you have to have so much, somebody has to really talk about it to let you know these things. So all these things that the men did in the land before you, that means the land, it's not just the land where you're going, it's all the land that you're going through to get there. It's before you. All those people from where you are now to where you're going, they did all of these things. And it says, and the land shall be unclean. So in other words, when you get to this place you're going, and as you're going through all of these places to get there, all of that's unclean. This kind of stuff makes the land itself impure. It's just everything about this is unclean. It's unholy. Okay. I don't remember. Have we? Oh, okay. No, we're actually just really just getting to this, I guess. Have we not? I don't know if I've already done this stuff or not. All right, so verse 28. And not shall vomit the land you in defile you, her, or it, it's the feminine, as that vomit the nation that to faces you. It just seems like I've already done this, but maybe not. And it starts off with and not or and no. It's the negative articles is the way they usually say it. Taki. It's if you don't do these unclean things, then the land will not vomit you out. It won't upchuck, it won't Ralph the people out of it, right? The land, because it says haaretz next, not shall vomit haaretz, the land. The land is not going to vomit you out if you don't do these things. What does that also mean? Well, if you do these things, the land's going to spit you out. Then it says etchem, you, bet tamachem, in defiling you. So, in other words, it's going to spit you out. Why? Because you defiled the land. So, that tells us something else. Why are the people who are in this land being kicked out? Because they defiled the land. So, the land is spitting them out. This is Ota Ka'asher Ka'a. And it's going to vomit. That's the word for vomit again. Et hagoi, the nations. It's going to vomit out the nations. That's basically in the Bible, that's everyone but the Jews. That's what they mean. That's the Gentiles today, but that's not what Gentiles were called back then. When you get to the first century and you're reading these New Testament letters, here's where they get the most perverted. The biggest mistake made in translating the New Testament letters is that the Christians, the Catholics, everybody in that Jesus following group that's all lumped together as Christians now. It wasn't that way when I was younger. The Catholics were the Catholics, the Christians were the Christians. The outliers like the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, they claimed to be Christian, but the Christians did not claim that they were Christians. Now it was that way when I was younger, but then over time, as I've gotten old, now everybody's lumped together. Well, those groups of people considered themselves to be the Gentiles. But in the time of the writing of those letters, only Jews could be Gentiles, if you will. It started with the Maccabees. And with the Maccabees, Judah Maccabee began to call other Jews Goim because they were not following the law. So if you were even if you were Jewish born and you could show the paperwork showing how your lineage goes all the way back to Moshe himself, you are just literally a direct descendant of Moshe. If you didn't live by the law, Judah Maccabee and his sons were calling you a Gentile. And now, by the time you get to the time of the writings of the New Testament, that was a very common thing. If you were a Jew who lived in another land, if you were an Italian Jew and lived in Italy, you were a Gentile. It didn't necessarily mean that that was a good or a bad thing. Now, it gained that bad connotation because it was assumed that if you lived in Italy, you probably didn't have a synagogue and you probably didn't have a rabbi and you probably didn't have a Torah scroll of any. You wouldn't have actually had a Torah scroll. They didn't have those back then. They had scrolls. You'd have a scroll of Genesis, if you will, Beth Rashid. You'd have one of Exodus, which is Shemot, and you would have, maybe you would have one of vaYiqra, the one that we're looking at now, or so on and so forth. Maybe Yirmiyahu, whatever. You, if you were a single individual, you would probably only would own one, and that's if you were wealthy or if it had been passed down through your previously wealthy family. That's almost the only way you would have had one. So this is not, people did not get up and read their Bible every morning as they drank their coffee before they went off to go to work. Didn't happen that way, except for very precious few, if at all. Generally, if you were going to hear the scriptures, you had to go to a synagogue where they had these scrolls. People would die and donate them to the synagogue. That's one way for them to get it, or the people would give their tithe at that synagogue and their offerings, and that they would use that money to commission someone to a scribe to write them maybe some of the letters that they didn't have. If they had Exodus, they were not looking for the rest of what we now call the Torah. That's not what they called. They called the whole Hebrew Bible the Torah, back from the 2nd century all the way back to Moshe. Although when Moshe was alive, probably only the law itself was called the law. But somewhere in between that time, and say that by the time you get to any of the major prophets, they're already calling everything written by any Jewish prophet, that was included in what they call the law. So this idea of Gentile being non-Jews is a more recent development. It did not exist in this time, especially not in this time. Uh, you had they did use it of non-Gentiles, but that's just them calling, other nations. They just, lump them in and call them Goyim because they're other nations. But they wouldn't have called a person, or a group of people who followed Judaism from anywhere a Goyim back then. That doesn't happen, as far as I can tell, until Judah Maccabee came along. And I cannot remember if it was Judah Maccabee who actually had that in his writing, or if it was Josephus writing about Judah Maccabee. You just have to get some of that stuff and look it up for yourself, because I can't remember it off the top of my head where I have read that. I think it's the first Maccabee where he does that, but I may be wrong. And if it's not there, then it was Josephus or someone like that talking about the Maccabees. I know it's connected to the Maccabees. I just can't remember how. All right, so then we have Lifnei, to the face, to the faces, or before. So the thing that we have to know here is that what we have now is verse 26 and verse 27. That's one verse. They broke up a verse right in the middle, and so you get 26 and 27. Verse numbers, chapter numbers, none of that existed back then. That didn't exist until the 8 or the 900s, or maybe later. It was and you can Google this if you want to. It was all those guys that used to shave the top of their head. A monk. It was a monk or a friar or what, I don't know the difference, but it was some Catholic dude that came up with the chapters and the verses. And honestly, he did not do a very good job. But anyway, so we need to read these two verses together if we're truly going to understand. I've got 27 and 28. Oh, I've just got the wrong numbers. Yeah, let me make sure. I think I just wrote the wrong numbers down. All the unclean thing, yeah. So I've just written down the wrong numbers. So we need to read this together as a single verse. All the unclean things men did in the land before you, and the land all the things that they did in the land before you, and the land shall be unclean, and the land will not vomit you out in your defilement as the nations were vomited out before you. So hopefully you're getting that. If already not to do these unclean things, so now it's saying because this is why all of these people are being kicked out of this land. And as long as you don't do those things, the land's not going to do this to you as well. The land. Okay, so verse 29, for all that he does from all the abomination, these, and will cut off they the souls that do from midst people. So we're starting off with Ya'asa, it's Asa, so it's the making, producing, manufacturing. We're just going to use the word does, all that someone does. Uh, what's next? Michol or Mikol, which is from any ha toevot, any of, so anything that is done from these abominations, these things that make you unclean, and these are things that make you very unclean. So all of the things that are done, uh, this is all of these. It says high less, so it's these, but we would just say these. Venichretu, that's to cut off as a part of a garment, like when David was hiding in the cave and King Saul went in there to cover his feet. That's an idiom for he went in there to do number two, which I would not have wanted to got. I would not have gotten that close to that man to cut off part of, because he cuts off part of his talit while he's relieving himself, or maybe he got there just before and scampered to the back. I don't know. That just would have been a very icky and awkward place to be, but he cut that off, right? So it's cutting off, and it's to just destroy, to run people out of a land is to cut them off, to not be able to be around your people is to be cut off. And that's what we're talking about. And then it says ha nefashot, and that's from nefesh, that's the word for soul. So it's the souls. And that's the part of you that goes on after you're dead. All right. So that's what a soul is. So the soul, ha-osot, that does these things. Mikarev, in the midst, among you, mam, among the people, and we Jews being the people, these are Jews. So the translation, for everyone who does these unclean things, these souls will be cut off from the midst of the people. Okay. Let me put this down for a moment and talk about this. How does the land spit people out? Does that make any sense? Well, it feels like we've already gone through this. I don't know if it's just because I've studied this out and I've talked to people about it throughout this last few weeks, or I actually talked about that. So just in case I haven't, it's pretty easy for a land to spit people out. Let's say a volcano starts erupting, or maybe a bunch of volcanoes start erupting. Well, that's going to spit the people out. Let's say lightning starts striking, you have a big storm and lightning strikes and you've got fires all throughout the forest. That vomits people out. Earthquakes vomit people out. Floods, especially tsunamis, vomit people out. He's not saying they don't come back. He's just saying that the land itself is going to vomit you out. And if it vomits hard enough, you won't come back. Chernobyl's probably not a good place to go back to, right? And so the sin of those people that are not building this thing safely and not maintaining it properly cause the land to spit those people out. That's how the land spits people out. It's really fairly simple. And I made a statement a couple of weeks ago that we're getting very close in America to our land spitting its people out. And as the verses have already said, if the land doesn't spit you out, God will. So, because we're getting close to a point in time where all of these sexual deviant things that we're not allowed to do, they are now in America among a very small minority. They've made it look like they're the majority, and everybody that, basically, if you're straight, you're in a teeny tiny minority. No, we're not. We are the vast majority. It's this teeny tiny minority that they've got control of Hollywood, they've got control of the media, and they've got control of the government at this point. And their stuff is being pushed through, and it's made everybody feel like we can't have a voice because we're in the minority. No, we're not. We are in the majority. So anyway, there are things that we can do to keep our land from spitting us out. Now, it's going to take some help from the government. You're not going to get it from the Democratic side of the aisle right now. They could put a different Democrat in the White House, and we really could see some change. But right now, there's not one that's going to run that would make that change that could win the nomination. So we're going to have to depend on some of these Republicans. But here's what we can do. Just the individual can do these things and help to stop this land from kicking us out or God kicking us out. Every American could file a Freedom of Information Act, that's a FOIA, a request rather, a FOIA request with the Department of Justice and the FBI for any information the government might have or might be keeping on you individually. Don't write it for somebody else. Request it for yourself. Hey, FBI, CIA, what are you keeping on me? What information do you have about me? But why would this be a fact? Well, think about this. Half of America claims to be Republican, and most of them claim to be conservative, and we believe in small government. And our government is bloated and completely and utterly out of control. And we all know this. And we feel like, well, there's nothing we can do where they're too big and too powerful. Well, the vast majority of them apparently not even going to work right now. Did you hear that? Oh my gosh. The government workers are still under the COVID thing and are going to be there for like 4, 5, 6 more months before it lifts and they can all go back to work. So not a lot of people there. But what if they came back to work in a couple of months and half of America had sent these FOIA requests? Well, that's going to make them pretty busy. And if they get busy doing their job because they only have a certain amount of time to respond to this stuff, or they get in some kind of trouble, I don't know exactly what that is, but they get in some sort of trouble. They've only got a reasonable amount of time to do their job. But if you inundate these offices with this, maybe they'll get to work and have to be worried about that instead of worried about what we're doing. Us people have never committed a crime in our lives. Instead of worried about us, maybe they can worry about doing their job, and maybe that'll teach them to really do their job. What the Republicans in the House of Representatives could do to make this easier on us, because a FOIA request is actually quite expensive, but the House could exempt fees and costs charged to the citizens for the FOIA request, for that information that they may be keeping on us. if so, what do you got to do? You got to start writing your senator and your congressman in particular. It's Congress that has to do this, but write your congressman at least. Won't hurt to write your senator, but write them and tell them they need to pass a bill that will cause this stuff to not cost us anything, and will inundate their offices with this information. And right now, I think this is something we might could get through. It's because, anyway, I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts too far. We need to send a letter to our congressman and ask them to cut the DOJ budget by at least 20% and transfer those funds to the Border Patrol and ICE so that they can secure our border, keep foreigners out, remove illegal people, protect us from illegal drugs, and protect us from drug cartels, none of which is being done right now. And they're saying they don't have enough money, so hey, let's take it from the DOJ. They're definitely not doing their job right now. We need to ask them to recognize that the FBI, CIA, DOJ, NSA, we need to get them to prohibit all of these agencies from investigating electoral challenges. It's none of their business, right? It isn't. Elections are up to the state, not the federal government. So they need to get their nose out of it. These, because like I said, these are the responsibility of Congress and the state itself. And these, no, what I meant to say was these FBI, CIA, DOJ, all these alphabet soup letters, they were put there by Congress. And Congress could change things. Our Constitution did not demand that we have an FBI or a DOJ or NSA or, none of those things. That's not in the Constitution. Congress set that stuff up, and Congress can fix it. And if they can't fix it, they can make it go away. So maybe if we ask them just to make it go away, maybe they'll fix it. I don't know. But here's a very important one that we need to ask our congressmen to do. We need to ask them that the attorney general and every other unelected position in the federal government should be subjected to a no confidence vote of Congress. Because, like right now, we have the man that's the head of the DOJ is the reason, truly the reason why the border is wide open. It's truly the reason why our the Border Patrol's hands are tied and can't do, they can't do their thing. That man's so busy trying to make people who complain about pornography being taught to grade school kids, trying to turn them into domestic terrorists, and trying desperately to prove that the biggest problem we have in America is white supremacy. Ay, ay, ay. But if they have to go through an impeachment process, it's not going to work because the Senate is still controlled by the Democrats, and they will not sign on the dotted line to get rid of Mayorkas or the DOJ guy. They won't do anything about these two men, so they won't agree to that. Well, Congress is the one that set them up, so Congress needs to change things and make it such that they can just vote them out with a no confidence vote. Because if you can do that, then they're not likely to put somebody else in there. It's just like the person we got rid of. Because let's say we could have gotten rid of Mayorkas and the other guy. Well, the president would just put two more people that are as bad or worse in their place, right? But if it's a no confidence vote and the president knows that if you stick someone like that back in there, they're just going to kick that person out too, then they might be a little more reasonable about who they put in these positions. And everyone that is unelected in the federal government should be subject to that. All of them. We can also add that everyone from the flunkies who actually execute censorship up to the board members of Twitter, Google, Facebook, and all other social media platforms who participate in colluding with the federal government to censor and monitor Americans should be prosecuted by an actual impartial jury and prosecuted to the full extent of the law for violations of our civil rights. Because that's their, so they're saying, well, they're a private company, they can do whatever they want. Really? You remember back in this, well, some of us will. You remember back in the 60s, black people would go into a restaurant and be kicked out because it was a private company. And therefore, they could decide who could be in their business or not. Well, why did that change? Because that's a violation of the civil rights of those black people, right? And so now black people are allowed to go wherever white people are allowed to go. And so these people who are telling you that Facebook and these companies are private companies and they have the right to violate your civil rights, no, they don't. There was a man who actually killed another man after the other man signed an agreement saying that it was okay with him for that man to kill him. I don't want to go into the details of what he did after the murder. That's even worse. But he got the man on camera saying, yes, I am okay. I want this guy to kill me. And you know what? He didn't get off just because the guy agreed to let the other man kill him. He was still charged with murder. I think got the death penalty too. You can't change the law just because you want to change the law. You can't change the law just because you think you can get away with it. You can't change the law just because you think other people agree with those laws being changed. We have civil rights, and when those civil rights are violated, you don't have anything to hide behind. So we need to ask our congressmen to do this. Now, we also need to add every federal employee from flunky to leader who participated in lying and covering up evidence in federal elections should be prosecuted for voter fraud, election tampering, just to name two. And this should also include mainstream and social media companies, as well as the people in the CDC. We really need a law that says that no one in government, no one is allowed to lie about anything. Now, if something is top secret, they can be allowed to not talk about it. But no one should be allowed to lie about anything in our government. Think what that would do. The FISA courts, well, they need to go. Patriot Act, it needs to go. They are unconstitutional and should not exist. They should never have existed. Everyone that participated in the BLM and Antifa riots should be prosecuted. The people that made the January 6th committee and put on that show should all be prosecuted for embezzlement of government funds because of that show trial that they put on. That's mishandling of funds. That's abuse of power. There's all kinds of things that they should be prosecuted for. And if we do get a Republican president, every liberal in his cabinet should be fired on day one. All of those attorneys, all of those people that are leftovers from beforehand, if they are liberal, if they're woke, they need to be fired on day one. And whatever we have to do to get rid of these liberal judges, these judges who do not care what the Constitution says, we need to find a way to get rid of them. I could go on apparently for several more pages, but that's enough for your first letter to your congressman. And we all need to do this. We all, every one of us, need to do this. Well, Rob, there's only a few of us here. You know, sometimes you start something, and the next thing you know, it's gone viral. Let's do this. Let's pray that it goes viral. We may have to hold off on the FOIA thing, but we can certainly write our congressman about all these things. Let me go through the last one. Because the whole idea here is that we don't want our land spitting us out. We don't want our God chasing us out. And these are things that we can do. Will they make a difference? The Bible says the prayer of a single righteous person has an incredible impact. I think this says avails much in English. No, it's very impactful. It's very powerful. That's what the Bible says. All right, and 30, is that our last one? I think it is. Yeah. Okay, it says very literal English. And guard you, charge me to not me, made from statutes, the abominations that will do they to faces you, and not shall unclean they in them. I, Yahweh God you. This was a little, I've only got just enough time to unpack this thing, I hope. Ushamartim, and that's from Shamar. That's the guard, to keep, to tend to protect, to watch over. You know, it's all that sort of thing. It's pretty much what you think of as the word guard. Mish Marti. These guard everything that God just said to us. We need to guard it. This word here is custody. It's guard, the act of guarding, a place where guards are set, a station where guards and watchmen themselves, or it's of the guards and the watchmen themselves. We're supposed to be the watchmen over this country. And we don't think of it in those terms because everything has been, connected to the religion, and we're supposed to guard the religion. And here we're being told to guard the land. And we live in America, so that's the land we're supposed to guard. Does that mean we shouldn't get involved in Israel in some way? No, I don't mean that, but this is the land we're in, and it does mean this. Levilti, which is literally to not me. Asot, and that's that asa, to make, to do, to work, to manufacture. It's all those things, and this is made in this case, I think. Mechukot, my statutes, 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 that which is established or defined, spoken always of a single law or ordinance, which that's not even true. It's generally spoken of all of the law. In this case, it's speaking of this group of laws on this one subject. Ha toevot, there's your subject, the abominations, the things, these particular things that make us unclean. Well, make anyone who does them unclean. Then it says asher na'asu, again, asa, they will do it, they'll make it happen. We sometimes just write the word do, D-O, or sometimes does, D-O-E-S, sometimes work, W-O-R-K, works. That's where we get our word for works in English. And then it says lifnechem, so that's before something, because it's the word for the face, and that means before or in the presence of. You could say it that way. Velo, and not ti tam u. If you don't do those things, you're not going to be unclean. Or if you do those things, you'll make yourself unclean. I'm actually not sure at this point. I'll know here in a minute. By him, in them, Ani Yahweh. So I am, he uses his proper name. I am Yahweh Elohechem. I am Yahweh your God. Is Yahweh your God if you do these bad things? Not for long. All you got to do is read Hosea chapter 2 and you find out, lo a me, I am not their God. They are not my people. That's what I actually said. Okay, so my translation. If you will guard my ordinances and not do from the statutes the unclean things which they will do before you, those people will do or have done. It could be either way. It said will do because it's in Hebrew. It's not that these people will do it. It's that these sins will be committed from now on. So it's right. So they say it in that way, not to mean that these particular people are going to do these particular things as you go through, and when you get there, they won't. They'll be kicked out. They won't be doing it there. It's just saying that this is going to go on basically till the end of time. It doesn't go away. So it's written in that manner for that reason. It's not personal of these particular people. They will do before you. They that will not become unclean by them, so that they will not become unclean. So you will guard my ordinances. In this case, it's not talking about all of his ordinances. It's the ordinances in this particular section, in this chapter. And not do from the statutes the unclean things which they do before you, which has been done before you, so that you will not become unclean in them. Let's put it that way. This is I am Yahweh. So this is the summation of all that has been said. If you do those things, bad things are going to come your way. But if you don't do those things, then you will remain clean and pure and holy. And I am, I being God, I am going to remain your God. And we really need for him to remain our God, since he's the only one that's real. You don't want to be picking up some idol and hoping that it's going to help you out, because it isn't going to do a thing for you. All right. Let me sum up here with talking about what's coming up. Chapter 19 is it's going to be the chapter that explains to us what we have to do to be holy, because this is where we get the God is holy, therefore we have to be holy. That comes from chapter 19. And so it's the holiness chapter, not as in Pentecostal holiness, as in real holiness. It will explain. We're definitely getting off of this subject, but we're going to get into the subject of what it takes for us to be pure and to stay pure. Shalom and shalom, you guys.
The blessing, vaYiqra. Yevarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness and favor and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.